I need to.
So I began talking to you about kind of the 35,000-foot level. That's one of my pastors likes to say, like looking down from a long ways away. And um, uh, the Gospel of John as a whole, and generally it's put into two divisions, two parts. The first part is, and roughly it's half, right? The Book of Signs comprises chapters 1 through 12. And in the Book of Signs, we see these miracles of Jesus that show who he is, that show his identity, that he is Messiah. And Jesus, or excuse me, John is answering, I told you, this question of who is this guy? The Book of Signs tells us who Jesus is, right? And then chapters 13 through 21 is the Book of Glory. And it focuses on the glorification of Christ through the cross and the empty tomb. And in the Book of Glory, Jesus receives glory from God. And this is all based on John 1:5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The darkness tries to overcome Jesus, but it cannot, and it never will ever um, uh, overcome Jesus. So this is the first sign, right? This wedding at Cana where Jesus miraculously creates wine. And it's John calls it the first sign because this is the very beginning of his public ministry, of Jesus's public ministry. And so this story is earlier than any of the stories in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But there's a problem at this wedding, and we see this in John 1 through 5. You know what the problem was. They ran out of wine. And that would have at very least brought shame onto their families. Jesus comes and makes sure that doesn't happen. Um, uh, and so Jesus, as you know, ends up making making that wine from scratch with a miracle. Okay, what was 4A? Was it 4A?
Yes.
Did you need it? Okay. Well, it's probably new. Interesting. It's an interesting formal response. It like man. It would be, and it's a mild rebuke as well. That's interesting because rebuking his mother. How does that go for you when you get? It doesn't go well. Yeah, obviously. Um, but Mary isn't really too fazed by that, and so he ends up acting, even though he says, well, "How does this involve me?" He ends up doing what Mary wanted him to do, provided wine. Jesus is declaring at the very beginning of his ministry that he is completely free from any kind of human advice, agenda, or manipulation. He is going to do what God has told him to do. And then we talked about that word hora, hour. And we're going to see this again when he says to his mother, my hour has not yet come. And that hour is the hour of his glorification via the cross and the empty tomb, which doesn't seem, especially the cross, doesn't seem like glorification, but it is in this case. So this is what's called a prolepsis. It's a theme that will come later, but they're giving you a tease of what's going to happen. So he's not refusing to act. Because we know that because the next thing she says, and Mary realizes it because the next thing she says is do whatever he tells you to do. So I think what he's saying is that he will act even though his hour is not yet come. But this time, to do his first public miracle has come. And Mary probably didn't understand all of it, but how could she? That's another common theme in John, misunderstanding. We'll see that a lot of times. And then, so I just talked about how, I think this is where we left off. I just talked about his hour has not yet come, his hour for glorification. We are going to hear Jesus say several times, my hour has not yet come in John. And the first time he says my hour has come is in John 12. And it's hard to understand why this kicks out off the hour, but it does. So this is in John 12. Now, among those who went up to worship at the feast were some Greeks. Greeks doesn't mean they were from Greece. Maybe some were. It's just a term for non-Jews, Gentiles. So some Gentiles came to Jesus. So these came to Philip. So the Greeks came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and asked him, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Philip went and told Andrew, and Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. And Jesus answered them, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. So something in these Gentiles seeking out Jesus trips off. Now this is chapter 12, and we've got a bunch of chapters to go, right? But from here on out, it's going to be very close in terms of timing of John, because a lot of that whole part of John is looking at the cross and heading to the cross. So for whatever reason, that was what kicked off the hour. And this is chronologically not long before Jesus will be crucified. So, and he also might be picking up on the symbolism of wine in the Old Testament. Because in the Old Testament, there is this picture of Messiah having a lavish banquet and full of everything, and especially abundant wine. So it might be picking up on the symbolism of wine and saying that time, and Revelation tells us there'll be this banquet in heaven, right? Jesus will have this banquet in heaven. And so he's picking up on that symbolism of wine, saying that the time for him to provide abundant wine has not, heavenly banquet has not yet is not yet arrived. So he's not refusing to act. And obviously Mary didn't interpret it that way. Because the next thing she says is do whatever he said. So I think he's saying that he will act even though his time is not yet come. His time to be glorified. But this time, the time for him to begin his ministry has come. And Mary didn't probably understand all of that. She was just happy he got the line somehow. Or maybe she knew he made it. I don't know. But that misunderstanding is another common theme in the gospel. So now we're going to go, verse 11 says, this, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and made known his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Disciples believed in him. John uses that word sign intentionally because he could have used any number of terms for this miracle. He could have used the word miracle. He could have used the word mighty work. Both of those mean a miracle. But he used this word, semeion. And he chose sign, Simeon, because a sign is more than just a display of supernatural power. It is that, but also there is this understanding that this is a new revelation of God, that God is doing something new. So God is revealing something new. And that's who Jesus is, right? He is the Messiah, and he is revealing something new. So it's like a sign. Like a sign, this miracle is pointing to something, or maybe someone. I don't know if you've ever. I don't even know if you've ever driven, but but I don't know if you've ever been in a car and you get lost and you got to find, you take out a map or you put up your phone and you're trying to get, nowadays you don't get in trouble. You just take me here, turn right now, that's all you need. But back in the day, we'd have the map out and it's this big and you're trying to drive and it was dangerous. But you see that sign that says, I-80 east or whatever, and then yep, that's where I need to go. And this sign is pointing to something too. It's pointing to Messiah, and it's pointing to Jesus' identity. And a wedding banquet is a particularly good place for Jesus to reveal himself. Because in the Old Testament, there is this picture of Messiah providing a banquet, a wedding banquet. We read about that in Revelation. And in that banquet, there will be abundant provision, especially abundant wine. So that time, that hour has not yet come. But this miracle is a sign that it is coming. And Jesus used the picture of a wedding banquet in his parables several times. And he referred to himself as the bridegroom and as the church, the bride. We're all his bride. And Paul said the same thing. So, what a perfect place to announce, to reveal the arrival of Messiah at a wedding banquet. But there's more to this. Something new is being revealed here. And that something new is that the purification rituals that had been used by the Jews for millennia is being replaced. No longer will purification be with water, with purification with water be needed, the jars. They were putting in their hands, not to clean their hands, but to ask to be made cleansed by God. And so when the hour comes, then we will have full purification because of what Jesus will do in that hour. But there's more. Jesus is another theme of John is replacement, and Jesus is saying he is replacing something, and he's not just replacing the purification rites, the laws of Judaism, but an entire system of how a simple people meet with God. Jesus is the new wine. This is what Mark says. Now, John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and people came and said to him, "Why do John's disciples, John the Baptist, and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples, not Jesus' disciples, don't fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, and the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine in old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed. And so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins. He's saying, I'm doing something new. This is completely new. And we can't connect with God the way we have for millennia, because Jesus has come, because Messiah has come. So in and through Jesus, the entire system of how a simple people connect to a holy God will be replaced, renewed, and restored. Possibly my favorite, my all-time favorite Bible scholar is Gary Birch. And you'll hear more from Gary Birch over the years. This is what Gary Birch says about this story. The story of Cana, therefore, is far more than a story about a wedding and some wine. It is a story that carries remarkable symbolism for Jews and their Messiah. Moreover, it is a story that makes sweeping commentary on the world into which Jesus is coming. They have no wine is not simply a comment about Mary, by Mary about the panic of the wedding's host. It is a theological statement about the Judaism that is now meeting its Messiah in his very first miracle. I told you that wine is often indicative of joy. And we talked about how the Judaism of Jesus' day was joyless. It was just drudgery. Just do this and do that, and I gotta keep that law, and I gotta, and they have lost their joy. They have lost their purpose. And so this story is talking about wine, but it's really talking about the joy, and it's really talking about staying connected to Jesus, being connected in faith. And that's what Gary Birch is alluding to. They have no wine is not simply a comment by Mary about the panic of the wedding's host. It is a theological statement about the Judaism that is now meeting its Messiah in his very first. So in this miracle, the glory of Jesus meets the purpose of John. And we can see that not only in this passage where we read, the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested, made known his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And then we go all the way to the second to last chapter of John, and John writes this. These were written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing in him you may have life with his name. Life is in Christ. You will not find life, and I would submit you will not find true life on earth, and you definitely won't have true life in heaven apart from Jesus. Jesus is the life, right? Yeah. So he tells us that in the Gospel of John. John tells. So okay, I just have one more thing to say. So John tells us this story so that we too might put our faith